It's time. From America's heartland and the banks of the mighty Mississippi, this is Steel Revolution.
All right, joining us on the podcast now, Tracy Leone,
here.
Iowa Federation of Labor political organizer. Thanks for coming on again, Tracy.
Thanks for having me back. It's always a pleasure. Wish I could be there in person this time.
We're trying to make it easier on people so we can keep on getting guests, so we'll be able to have people over the phone.
You guys record this so early, and then I have late nights going to phone banks in other cities and driving back at a different time frame here, so appreciate the call in instead.
Oh, and that's right, and I didn't look at the paper and went to bed early. We had bout of the flu at the house last night, so I didn't see. How did the election turn out? It was last night, right?
Yeah, it was another landslide. 2,000 and change to about 700, I think, and change, maybe 800 tops. Poor Gonzalez. He's lost 2 times in a row now, taking a big bullet, I guess, for his party, but the truth is, we really had a fantastic ground operation for both Jim Lycom's race to replace Joe Sang in the Senate District 45. For those of you who weren't following this, Joe Sang, long-serving senator in Davenport, died of a glioblastoma earlier this year, sending a sort of chain reaction of special elections. And then after Jim won his race, basically 3-1 against Republican Mike Gonzalez, just last night, Monica Kurth, Democrat, beat Mike Gonzalez again because he threw his hat in the ring for that special election, and we won again, roughly 3-1. So we're very pleased, and I look forward to having both Monica and Jim in the House and Senate. Jim's been long-serving, and he's a fantastic labor voter. And Monica is a recently retired educator from Scott Community College, so she's going to bring that perspective, especially adult education, into the conversation. I'm not sure that there are that many people who have an adult education background who are serving in the legislature. So she's a fantastic person, and she's going to make a fine representative.
Yeah, I guess. With what I saw, I think, and I know, Tracy, you had a lot to do with it. They had a great ground game, because that's the only signs I saw was for Monica around town. So I think by far you guys must have blew it out of the water with the ground game.
The funny thing, you bring up yard signs. It's just so funny because I don't know if you recall back to October, November, which seems like a whole generation, doesn't it? Given everything that's happened since then, but there were yard signs all over the place for Mark Lofgren, and I think we're all traumatized by that, given that he beat Chris Brace with so many votes for that Senate race that straddled Muscatine County and Scott County. So we're all a bit traumatized by the fact that we have to get out these yard signs, but they are important, right? That's something that is a tradition here. But there's also the adage that says, signs don't vote, right? And so what we do in place of, focusing so much on signs, because they are kind of a pain in the ass, right? Especially when you have to put it into frozen earth. But, so the ground game, really what we want to do is, talk to voters and knock on doors and make phone calls and collect absentee ballots. And after what happened with Lofgren, we also feel like if we neglect the yard sign game, we're doomed to lose too. So, but he had some of his old yard signs out, and I'm glad to see he didn't waste any more money, and they were still the Gonzalez for Senate signs rather than Gonzalez for House signs. But really, Monica's campaign team was remarkable. They had people on phone banks every day. I have to give a shout-out to AFSCME retiree Mike Weinard, who I think is probably the hardest working Iowan right now. He gets that label. He and his wife are out for both Jim Lycom and Monica's campaigns, in this incredibly dedicated way that you don't really seat out of very many people at all, let alone the level he gave it. So big shout out to Mike. In both situations, our candidates won before Election Day. That's a really important tradition here in Iowa, and something that we're worried about with this new legislature is the early voting opportunities we have. I want to say it's 45 days before the election. You can either vote by mail or in person at the auditor's office or at any early voting sites that get set up. But in both cases, Jim and Monica collected, I'm more familiar with Monica's numbers. So in this House District 89 race, Monica's campaign picked up 1,000 votes for Election Day compared to less than 100 for Mike Gonzalez. I think the total number, once you counted in the independents, he was just a little bit over 100 and she was just a little over 1,000. So it's hard to come back from that, you know? I mean, they had a pretty good Election Day game going on. If you're already behind 9-1, you have to do extraordinarily well on Election Day to win. So much of the ground game is made up of that early ballot collection, and Democrats really stepped it up. Talking to some of the volunteers and especially the labor staff, everybody felt like, you know, we didn't just have to win, but we had to win big, right? We had to make a point with these victories. They were Democrat-leaning districts to begin with, so the voters were there, right, to begin with. But getting them to vote on a special election on cold winter days is not the easiest thing. So the best, tool we have for getting that done is an early vote, right? Get it mailed. You don't have to worry about a snowstorm. You don't have to worry about having the family with the food. Like, that's what's going on with you, Roy. So 9-1 on election eve, and then election day. Then Monica still managed to even eke out a margin of victory, even if you just count the election day voters.
Oh, very nice. See, a lot of things that you talk about all kind of boil into what I want to talk to you about today. So, like you mentioned, Muscatine, when you're talking about Chris Brace or Muscatine County, and I know we had you on before. We talked about the mayor. Is there any updates? I couldn't really find anything other than now the city council wants to impeach her over who knows what. They won't come out and say. Do you have any updates on that?
No. Seriously. What happened on January 12th was City Council voted unanimously to begin investigating the mayor for charges that have really not been released. And to this day, still nothing. I mean, they've hinted along the margins, but what her exact crime is, we're still not sure. And it's just absolutely baffling, because typically when a politician, right, when an elected body, rises to the occasion of removal of office, right, of another elected official, big scandals occur, right, like that Mayor Ford, right, up in Toronto with his, drug addiction and prostitute habit, right? Like,
right.
Big things happen, and it's public, and it's embarrassing, and it's shocking. Or with Governor Ryan, right? The license for bribe scandal ultimately resulting in a whole family getting killed, right, by a driver who got his license through bribe, right? These shocking things, right? And then the public is outraged, the newspapers are all over it, and, ultimately there's a clamoring from the grassroots saying he has the right to serve, or she's corrupt, get rid of her, right? None of that happened. Simply there's been this very, very partisan struggle, and it's a power struggle that's been happening between the mayor and the city council. But it's by no means scandalous. I mean, especially given the type of power struggle we saw over the last years with Barack Obama, right? Power struggles are not, a walk in the park. They certainly aren't, evidence of a smooth running democracy. But by no means do power struggles, should power struggles result in impeachments, right? The law is pretty clear. I mean, there's like 5 or 6 things in which Iowa statute permits for the removal of an elected official from office, and power struggles is one of them. It has to do with obstruction, a felony, even public drunkenness, right? But, you know, Diane Roderson's not guilty of any of those things. So when this emerged, we were shocked, but it wasn't completely surprised because, you know, small towns being what they are, rumors are always going about, right? So, you know, the mayor himself even was like, oh, you know, I'm hearing rumors, right? Because, you know, you've got the city administrator and you've got the city council members and you've got their staff and everybody's gossiping, right? It's just like any sort of work environment. People get together and they start whispering about one another. But nobody thought that anything would ever come of it, right? Because, like I said, what has she done wrong? And to this time, we're still not sure. It's been 3 weeks since they said they were going to impeach her, and the city has not filed actually impeachment proceedings, which also raises another question, right? Because then, you know, the assumption is we have to impeach you because you're bad for our city, right? You're so bad for our city, we can't wait for an election. We have to remove you right now. So if there's this fierce urgency that led to an impeachment, suddenly we're in this sort of like holding pattern, which makes you doubt that there was ever anything urgent to begin with.
Right. I know that I was looking up, try to look up, see if there was anything new, and then going off of our last conversation on this, that, you know, she took office, the council stripped her power, you know, she then kept her out of closed-doored sessions and pretty much kept her in the dark, and you'd made a comment that all she is a glorified ribbon cutter. So I don't know. I mean, is the impeachment that she held the scissors wrong? I mean, or using not the big scissors, but little scissors? It doesn't seem like there's much there.
Yeah, right. I mean, she tried to appoint people to commissions they didn't like, and then they had to then they decided they were going to remove her powers to appoint people to boards and commissions. All of that took time. It took energy away from governing the city so that they could realign the way that government was run, which, you know, imagine that cost the city attorney money, right? But you can't put that on the mayor. The city council chose, right, to take the time to remove her powers, right? And then the city manager then asked the city attorney, you know, draft the paperwork to get this done. That cost is on them, right? So the one sort of hint that we've seen in, I think, the Muscatine Journal, or perhaps it was the QC Times, and also the Des Moines Register did a story, is they're trying to say that there was some sort of financial malfeasance, right? That there's $100,000 in legal fees that the city has incurred, you know, and that was unbudgeted, right? And so that is just a terrible thing. And the only problem with that, again, is, well, let's see the specifics about this, you know, these legal fees, right, that the city is incurring. And the Register actually did their research and pointed out that, yeah, there might have been $100,000, but that's only $30,000 more than what they incurred in the previous year before the mayor was elected, right? So if you are comparing, you know, fees, you know, the fact that, you know, more money has been spent this year than before, you could attribute to any number of things, right? Including the fact that the city council, you know, asked the attorney to draw the papers to remove her powers, right? And now, what is it costing the taxpayers for the city attorney to now be drawing up a big investigation and the documentation, you know, for dealing with impeachment? Another issue, and this is kind of a fascinating issue, is, again, going back to the rumor mill, you know, there was some talk
Tracy,
about perhaps the city.
Tracy, yeah. The rumor mill is always the most productive mill, by the way.
Hey, I'm not above gossip either. I think that the only difference between gossip and news is really the source, right?
I'm sorry, I had to get that in there once, since you brought it up.
No, hey, with that, I'm going to go get me some coffee so I can keep this up. But so the other sort of element or factor in all of this with the legal fees is the mayor had asked for an audit to be conducted of the previous mayor Hopkins administration, because she's the mayor, so she's privy to some of the books, certainly, right? Even given the fact that they're shutting her out of so much, you know, of her official duties or typical duties of a mayor. And she said, well, something didn't look right. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that the previous mayor had taken a couple trips to China, right? That's a sister city in China. And we know that the current president of China, I'm going to mispronounce it, Xi Jinping, I think his name is, during his youth actually spent time as an exchange student and lived in Muscatine, which, is a really big deal. That's pretty exciting to have, for any city in the U.S. to actually make that claim about one of the world leaders, right? Especially of this incredibly powerful country, right? So, that's kind of understood that, the mayor would reach out and kind of build this relationship. But the question is, did the city council approve for the rumor was that the wife of the mayor attended with the mayor, but at the city's expense. So, these kind of junkets, right? We would understand if the elected official goes, but, if the elected official wants companionship and family to be there, typically, you pay for your family to come, right? I mean, we go on union trips once in a while, and even if a family stays in a hotel room, we pay for their plane tickets, right?
Right.
We pay for their dinners, and we pay for their drinks, and, and whatever little tchotchkes we buy at Disneyland if we happen to be in Anaheim, right, for a convention. So the question was, were the taxpayers on the hook for some of these expenses? And then I'm not sure what else was in there, but that was sort of the rumor around town, right, that the people paid for the mayor's wife to go to China. So she would have these sort of poppies with her constituents. I'm not sure if they were monthly or weekly, but she kept hearing over and over again this kind of rumor. And she's like, well, I'll look into it. I'll ask the city manager to look into it. And, one thing led to another, and ultimately she requested that an audit be conducted by the state. What happened then is interesting. Typically, they take a perusatory look through the books, and if everything looks fine, they just say, everything looks fine, good luck to you, but everything looks fine from our point of view. That's not what happened. When state officials looked at the books, they said, well, some things don't look fine, right? Actually, this perusatory glance at the books warrants further investigation. So then the state officials came to the city of Des Moines, and I'm not sure how many of them there were, but I understand there were more than one person, and that required, the city to bring out all their books and records, and so I think they're trying to say that, that cost us time too, right? The audit has yet to be released, right? So we're not sure what they found, if anything, but because it hasn't been released, at least not to the public and not to the mayor, we're not sure what they found yet, and if there was inappropriate expenses, and so that's also, I think, what they're trying to say the mayor did, right? That this $100,000 was also the cost of, city workers who, and this is the funny part, is they're already being paid. It's not additional expenses, right? To instead spend their time bringing out paperwork for a state audit.
Okay.
So we will see all kinds of cloak and dagger stuff.
Another thing going on here in Iowa, and especially close to home here in Davenport, is the school funding. I did a little bit of research that so some school districts get state funding at $175 less per pupil than some of other school districts in Iowa. Iowa spends almost $1,000 less on each K through 12 student. That's $1,000 less than the national average. And it's Davenport alone is missing out on about $3 million a year, which equates to about a couple dozen teachers and new computers and bolstering programs. We attended a funding equality rally for the school funding. What I found really odd about it, of course, now we live in an up is down, down is up sort of a world or time now, but it had the Quad City Chamber of Commerce, members of the trades, or the Quad City Federation of Labor, small business, big business. John Riches from Arconic was out there. All these people coming together to say, hey, we need to fix this funding, and you just don't see that I guess both me and you don't maybe not have a whole lot into it, but just wondering if you could spend a brief minute talking about how that group came together, because you just don't see those people working on an issue together.
Yeah. Well, yeah. The funding formula for Iowa is a complicated funding formula, and when they established it 40 years ago, the intent was to equalize school funding. And honestly, they do. It's a pretty good job compared to states like Illinois. Right. The difference there is they're still heavily dependent on local property tax rates that, a city like East St. Louis or Chicago schools compared to like New Trier High School is thousands of dollars. I mean, it's outrageous. So, let's begin by saying that Iowa, 40 years ago, was really smart and forward-thinking and said, this is important, right? A kid in rural Iowa deserves as much as a kid in the west end of Davenport deserves as much as a kid in, the fancy suburbs, in Pleasant Valley, right?
Mm-hmm.
But part of the compromise still had in it funding discrepancy of up to, I think, $175 per pupil per year. That's not a lot per pupil, but when you add all the pupils, in Davenport's case, I think it amounts to $3 million difference per year that gets that compared to what it could potentially get, if it had the same funding cap as Pleasant Valley. So, and over the years, you can imagine $3 million this year, $3 million next year, $3 million the year after, and all the while, Davenport's looking at its budget and saying, well, we just cut $3 million last year, but because the way this funding formula works, even though over this time we've been able to raise money, through local property, tax levies, in excess of the money we've spent. Therefore, we've got roughly $27 million in our rainy day fund. We have money to spend in Davenport, but we're not permitted to because of the school funding law, right? That basically equalizes funding across the districts. So, it's one of those, that term unintended consequences, right? It's kind of a perfect example of that. So, the superintendent, who's got nothing to lose, right? The guy I think he's north of 70, he's at the end of his career. He's been, has really spring career, too. He's been in the military. He's even served in districts that served Indian reservations. He really is, a fantastic American, right? Like, really up there, even before all this happened. But the basic fairness of it all, he couldn't believe it. And he said, there's nothing that makes sense about us having money and not being able to spend it. Meanwhile, we're creating programs for a generation of students, right? It's not just that you look at it in terms of years, but you look at it in terms of years that you can't make up, right? So if there's the first grader, and for the 5 years that I think Tate's been there, Superintendent Tate has been there, that person, that little human being, has been shortchanged for his entire elementary school years, right? We all know the importance of those early elementary years, from the age of 0 to 3, right? But then seriously, up until the 3rd, 4th grade, so much foundational learning goes on. It's really hard to ever make up for that, no matter what amount of education you get later on in life. So, you're quite literally robbing, a generation of people, right, of their rights to a good quality public education. And the importance of it all, too, is while you have this funding discrepancy, the law also permits for open enrollment. So if you come from a family that is really proactive and has the means to open enroll you, even though you're a taxpayer in the city of Davenport, you live somewhere there, but your family can drive you over to Bettendorf or Pleasant Valley or North Scott, you can actually send your kids to another school district that gets more funding, right? So Davenport's looking at that and saying that's fundamentally just not fair, right? Because there are a lot of students whose parents are working a couple of jobs, or they might have parents that are not very involved in their education, right? It's not a priority. So they don't have the ability to, get over to PV for a top-notch education. And I don't mean at all to slam the Davenport School District. I mean, they still have very high graduation rates compared to the rest of the nation. The Central High School is like a flagship institution. It's phenomenal. They do extraordinary work with the resources they're given. But it's still not fair that they're making cuts at a time when they have money in the bank and they don't have to. So, the way it all came together is, the superintendent came a couple years ago, said he was going to spend more money, and then they started to spend more money, and the state board of education officials basically filed complaints against him. Everything is sort of in limbo, right? He's continuing to break the law, and for now they're letting him, although they are filing charges that could ultimately result in him losing his license and actually being removed from office. And I think even the Board of Education members, including Dan Gosa, our friend and insulator, they could also be charged with misdemeanors, right, for violating the law. So there's a lot at stake here. So all this is going on, and so earlier in last year, I'm not sure if it was in December or January. Like I said, this last 2 months since the election in November has been such a blur. But the United Way of the Quad Cities held a fantastic event at the what's it called? Iowa Center now.
Yeah.
In which they, other community stakeholders there, so people from labor as well as people from management, and people from social service agencies, and everybody in between, right, who cares about our community. And they brought in a speaker. Sorry, I forget his name. Maybe we could look it up on Google while I'm talking. But he wrote a book and that basically looked at the importance of education to just about every sort of social factor, right? And then also the importance of having good jobs, right? Just about all the different social factors, from pregnancy and teen pregnancy to all the things that happen that are bad, right? That we don't want to happen. He said, that's why it is so important for us to fund education, right? And afterward, I was talking with Henry Marklock from the Chamber of Commerce, and, we talked about the unequal funding, and the superintendent was there, and, we just chatted afterwards, and the superintendent went on his way, and then Henry and I continued to talk, and, we remarked that, here at this event, United Way was able to bring together a lot of different stakeholders, right? And how great that is that we're all sort of on the same side in this room. How can we be on the same side, like out in the public and in the legislative halls? So I said to Henry, I said, we need to, if the chamber, because he told me I didn't know, he told me that the chamber was in support of equal school funding. And I said, okay, well, I know the Quad Cities Federation is too. Let's do a press conference. Let's basically tell the people of Davenport, tell our elected officials that, the chamber and the Quad Cities Federation of Labor are often at odds in the legislature. On this issue, we're actually unified. And so we went back to our folks and we talked to different people, and we reached out to Maria Dickman with the city of Davenport because even though it is a different governing body, Maria Dickman served on the school board before serving in her current capacity as an alderwoman. But, good cities need good schools and vice versa, right? So even though there's separate bodies and they govern separately from one another, their interests are mutual. So she, talked to Mr. Klitsch, and pretty soon we had this press conference set up, and Roy, you were there and you can speak to it, but I thought it was pretty interesting, right? Seeing Roy Washburn from the Tri-City Building Trades and the Quad City Federation up there on the stage, with Kelly Grubbs and, important people from Arconic and the Chamber, right? And all basically saying, we agree on this. We want equal funding now. The devil's in the details, though. And am I talking too much? Interrupt me, please.
No.
Any questions?
No, I mean, I think that pretty much sums it up. I mean, it was cool that we could have you on, and then you could say, well, this is how it kind of all came together, because like I said, you don't see all of those people in the same room or working towards the same cause, and like you said, my kids are in Davenport schools. They've got great teachers. They're great schools. It's nothing about them, but like you said, I mean, if you don't give them the funding, it's less teachers, so it's a bigger classroom size. There's less programs. I think what I have heard, haven't personally witnessed, but like a lot of our schools are losing the Woods classes, the metals classes, stuff like that, and that's the kind of thing that that we need, but they can't afford it and fund it. So it's great that everybody came together for the common goal of having, hey, we need well-educated kids, young adults in our area, and it's better for everybody.
Yeah, and that's so important that people think about education in a very holistic way. I mean, STEM is important, no question. Science, technology, education, engineering, and math, right? But there's a education theorist. His name is Howard Gardner, and he came up with this multiple intelligence theory, which basically says, some people are really good at math. Some people are good at English. Some people are good at math and English, but they suck at music. Some people are fantastic at music. They're geniuses, but, they can't do math at all, right? Some people are probably kinesthetic geniuses like Michael Jordan, right? Or ballerinas, right? They have ways that they can move their body that are brilliant, and what they do for our society, culturally, really kind of rounds out our humanity, right? So when we cut out those classes that they, some people will call electives, or, whatever kind of term they give them to insult them, it's fundamentally wrong, right? You need to have and address everybody's individual learning needs, and also their individual learning abilities, right? And so if you take out woodworking, and people who are really good with their hands don't have that opportunity, then they might think they're the dumb kid, right? And in fact, they could be brilliant with that skill they have that's not standard.
Absolutely. Before we get done talking to you today, this Chapter 20 in Iowa was coming around the hall. I didn't know what it was. Then, of course, in prepping or lining you up to come on, you brought up Chapter 20, and like I mentioned to you, and I hope you didn't take it the wrong way. I'm like, well, I'm gonna have to do homework because I don't know what it is. We've just hearing it, coming about around the hall and that. So, want to spend a little bit of time on that. I think it goes into. Before you were on, we had a District 8 staff rep for the steelworkers on, and talking about what's going on in Kentucky and the battle, or the anti-worker, anti-union stuff that's going on there. Is this Chapter 20 in Iowa, is it coming now, or are we gearing up for a fight with that, with the current administration?
Absolutely. They'll say their answer is no, not at all, right? That's what they're telling people. Don't worry about it. Just relax. But as evidence, right, we know for sure something's coming. Is the university, the graduate students at the University of Iowa, they're in the union, they call it COGS. I'm not sure what that stands for, but it's COGS. And they're in negotiations right now with the University of Iowa because they work there. They're state employees, and because they're state employees, their negotiations are governed by Chapter 20, the collective bargaining law in Iowa. And so, just as evidence, we know they're planning something. They refuse to negotiate, and the reason for negotiating is, well, there's going to be changes to the collective bargaining law, so we're not going to negotiate until those changes are implemented. So, on the one hand, they're saying, no changes. But then on the other hand, their representatives at the university are telling, people during negotiations, changes are coming, so we can't negotiate. And they're going to file an arbitration, right? And because it's just completely unfair, and it's wrong for them to not, start negotiating when the term is up. But yes, something's coming, and it's evil, it's awful, and no matter what they say to us, we've been through this rodeo before in Kentucky, like you said, in 2011 in Wisconsin, right, in Michigan, right, and it's all politically calculated. I mean, it has everything to do with politics as well as just removing workers' rights. A very cynical, very malicious thing that they're doing to America, right? And it's horrifying. I mean, they have Trump in power. It's really horrifying because if you actually look at fascism, the history of fascism around the world, the first groups they come after and steal the power away is unions, our workers' rights. it's truly horrifying. I mean, I feel like, there's enough good people in our country. The majority lost on election day, right? The majority literally lost on election day, so we're ruled by this tyrannical minority with bigoted, racist, homophobic, anti-worker views. And what's happening in Iowa is sort of the local version of our national dilemma. So, taking away rights is un-American fundamentally, whether it's voting rights or workers' rights. And that's what gets me about some of these conservatives, right, who, beat their chest and talk about America and how much they love our freedom, right? Why is workers' freedom not included in that idea? You tell me, Rick, what do you think?
Yeah. Well, I mean, they obviously with the Chapter 20 on what I read, it was a better way for public sector employees to bargain with their employer, kept strikes down, set ground rules, and it like what I had seen, that there hasn't been a strike since this took effect in the 1974. So I mean, there must be a reason to go after it, obviously to weaken the public sector unions. Me personally, I believe, because there's people that are in our union, I'll say it, that said, well, I don't like the public sector unions because I pay for them, and obviously that's going to be what comes out by, I believe, the governor eventually trying to get support on this is going to be something like this.
That argument rings false, because even in private sector, you still pay for it, right? If you don't have some sort of, the cost of your car is a factor, right?
Yeah.
When you have, in the private sector, right? So, look, that's a really sort of thing that people say, well, it's public that pays taxes, therefore I have to have a seat at the table. Well, do you have a seat at the table with GM and UAW? Do you have a seat at the table with Arconic and Steelworkers, right? Because all that ends up being a part of our economy, and people are involved one way or another. But you're right that literally the Governor Ray in 1974, Republican, who signed the collective bargaining law into effect, said the reason they did this was, quote, to promote harmonious and cooperative relationships. Prior to collective bargaining law in Iowa, it was sort of a wild west. You were having 5 strikes happened in just the 3 years between 1967 and 1970. Nurses were on strike. Teachers were on strike in Keokuk.
Those teachers also went to jail, I saw and then that was one of the the major reasons why they went away with it, or at least they got the community support after they saw their teachers that are teaching their kids go to jail.
Well, it's funny, back then, since these regulars have come into effect, teachers are suddenly bad people, right? But back in the 60s and 70s, teachers were part of society, right? As they ought to be, right? I mean, if you entrust them to, your children, for so many hours a day, obviously, you would only do that if you feel like these are very, important people and trustworthy people, right? All the propaganda these days, teachers are seen as somehow bad, right? Overpaid, summers off, all the junk that's out there. The truth is, worldwide and historically, and even in this nation, teachers have been seen as really important people to be respected, and people that we should that we owe a lot to, right? Because they are nurturing our children and teaching them the things that we can't, because we don't know math, we don't know history, or we're busy, earning money to keep a roof over our children's heads, right? We're all working together in this game. So when these teachers were locked up in Keokuk, it was a scandal. This is a southeast Iowa town, and again, a close-knit community, and, their friends and neighbors were being put in jail, right, for just trying to get decent wages, right? Something that everybody understood deserved. So yeah, and firefighters. Imagine if there was a fire in the middle of this strike. Right? So the legislature realized that they had to do something about it. Now, employees at Arconic in the private sector, you have your union rights given through federal law, right? Right. Or removed by federal law, right? Yeah. But public sector workers in the states are given their rights by the states. So, for instance, in Illinois, they didn't actually get collective bargaining rights officially until like 1980 after Iowa. So, they said, well, we need to put some structure in place because we can't have this Wild West sort of arbitrary, system in which some teachers are heavy unions, others don't. Some have contract, others don't. If there's a dispute with the contract, we don't really know what laws to follow, right? Like, it was very confusing and unsettling, and, how do you keep this machine of the government going forward, right, without any official structure in place? So it's a smart move, by the legislature and the governor in 1974 to pass Chapter 20 collective bargaining law. And it was bipartisan, and, it set in place that, unlike Illinois, where public sector workers can go on strike and actually fight in the next month or so with the impasse that's happening with Governor Rauner over there, in Iowa, you can't go on strike. They have what's called binding arbitration. And it's a fantastic system, and, if you actually look at it over the years, it's resulted in zero strikes because, they're prohibited, but it also has actually resulted in fewer and fewer arbitrations over the years because the way the law is written says the management comes to the table with their proposals in the contract. The union and workers come to the table with their proposals to the contract, and then you negotiate over days, weeks, months, however long it takes. And at the end of it all, in the private sector, you either come to mutual terms and you vote on it on each side, or you don't and you go on strike and hell breaks loose. But in the public sector, what happens is when you come to the table, you can't play the same game, right? Like in the private sector, what we'll do is we'll go high and they'll go low because somehow or another you have to meet in the middle, right? Because you can't backtrack, right? That's against the law. You can't suddenly say,
Yep.
well, instead of 3%, we demand 20%, right? That's bargaining in bad faith.
Right.
In public sector, when you come to the table, you have to come with terms that are pretty agreeable because what happens is as you inch closer to some sort of mutual terms, if you cannot agree to mutual terms, both sides take their last and final offers to an arbitrator, and the arbitrator's chosen again through a really fair process, right? Where they both mutually agree on who's going to be the arbitrator, and the arbitrator looks at both management's last offer and the union's last offer. And rather than say, I'm going to, slice it in the middle, and I'm going to come up with my own, I'm going to impose my own, benefit decision, he or she, the arbitrator, has to choose one side or the other, right? So that forces them to come together because if you can imagine, management saying 0% or wage cuts, and the teachers, for instance, will say, well, we want 1%. The arbitrator is going to look and see that teachers in similar districts with similar budgets across the state are getting 2% or 1%. Of course, the arbitrator is going to choose the 1%, right? And if the teacher said, 20%, they're going to say, well, that's outrageous, right? So the way that arbitration works in Iowa is it forces both sides to be reasonable, and it forces them, before coming to arbitration, to be as close as possible because the arbitrator's decision is final, it's binding, and it's going to be one side or the other, not some sort of compromise. One of the ideas floated a few years back was that the arbitrator could, impose something in the middle. And again, if you can imagine how that would play out, obviously both sides are going to stick to their guns with outrageous, proposals, on one side versus the other. So it's been really good at promoting harmonious and cooperative relationships, in my opinion. The attack against it right now is entirely politically motivated and has nothing to do with the actual effectiveness of the law.
And Tracy, this is Mike.
Yeah.
You were talking about the arbitration, and in reading the stuff that you sent us, in the last 5 years, I think it throws out 16 because this was done in 16, 76 cases. It was even. I mean, I think it was 22 for the employer, 21 for the union, and then they did split in 33, but it was a very split decision where one issue went to the union, one issue went to the employer. I just... to me, to anybody with common sense, this plan works. It works very well. So I just don't get it.
Yeah, and like what I'd say to people if they say that public sector workers don't deserve whatever benefits they got is when we were laid off, I worked for the city of Davenport and I worked in the sewer department, and that is a dirty, nasty job. And for people to say, and they, in my opinion, don't get paid enough for that job, and that's where I see it. And furthermore, in doing research, if you look at what I saw, I believe it was a UNI post that they were gearing up to fight some of this stuff coming with their teachers union. That what had happened in Wisconsin was that now there's just high turnover for teachers because of the way this happened. So all in all, we need to do what we can do to stand up and fight this stuff.
Right, and there's and we're all in it together, right? I mean, solidarity says we care about fellow workers, and if also because they're public sector, it actually affects your quality of life, right? In your schools and in your cities and counties. If you don't have snowplow drivers that are well paid and on the job at 2:00 in the morning, good luck driving to work the next day, right?
Right.
But even if you look at it from political calculus, this has everything to do with weakening all workers' powers, right? Because if you weaken the public sector, then they're going to turn around and guess what? They're going to say, well, why do these guys at Alcoa have a pension or Arconic have a pension and I don't, right?
Right.
And as workers that actually have dignified wages and and a pension which will permit them the dignity of retirement, it turns into I want what you got, and it's not fair that you got it, right? So I don't care about you anymore. It's really truly sad, and it's pathetic what they're doing to workers. And as my boss likes to say, Ken Sagar, we had a labor movement before the law permitted us to, and when they take our rights away, we're still going to be here, right? It's not like we're going to be like, oh, we can't, negotiate. We're going to go climb this hole and become slaves and just let them abuse us, right? And then, no, we're not. We're fucking human beings, and the push on us and oppress us, we fight back, right? It's in our DNA. So yeah, they can do this, but it's not as if the law or any of these laws that Trump's going to throw at us, or Branstad or Rauner, right, that is stealing our dignity, is going to make us just settle down and take it, right? Thank you, sir. Can I have another? Right? Hell no. All it does is it makes our lives more unsettled. It creates disharmony, right? It just makes it so that we're not a great nation at all, despite what the hats say, right?
Right. Absolutely. So I think we're about out of time. We got to let Sean be able to work his magic and get this uploaded. So thanks again for coming on. Appreciate all your time, Tracy.
Thank you guys. I love being on the show, and next time I'll try to get maybe big time name, maybe Mayor Butterton herself or Ken Sagar.
Absolutely.
That'd work. Thanks, Tracy. We appreciate it.
All right, guys. Have a great day.
All right, you too. Thanks, Tracy.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh, wait. Can I add one more thing? I'm sorry.
Okay.
Sure. A call to action. Right? I could until the sun goes down, but the point is we can fight. We are fighting. Great things are happening. We've been doing phone banks across Iowa, in which we're calling voters that live in targeted Senate districts, Republican districts. And after we talk to them and we find allies, right, people who support collective bargaining, we're able to transfer their calls directly to their legislators. And this is having a fantastic effect. I mean, we're getting reports from people lobbying in Des Moines that the senators and representatives are saying, well, why are all these people calling me about Chapter 20, right? There's no bill yet. So the point is, we need to talk to our senators and representatives, and especially, more so now than ever, right? And we need to get our ranking members to do it, and that's happening. So we're going to try to do a phone bank actually tonight over at Steelworker Hall. We're going to test the computer capacity there and whether or not the guys can get cell phone connections in that building. I know sometimes they have trouble doing that. But so, you can go to the IowaLaborNews.com and learn more. You can call any of the state Fed officers, but we're going to have these phone banks are going to continue. Like I said, the people at the University of Iowa have been staffing really successful phone banks. We've had them in Cedar Rapids and Sioux City and Des Moines and Dubuque. But we're also having a postcard campaign. So we will have these cards available for steelworkers to sign, and I'll get them to Brad and to get to you guys to get in the plans and among your, members to basically sign these solidarity cards that we're going to deliver to the legislators. So a lot of your members live in Senator Robbie Smith's districts. He's one of the people that we're lobbying right now. So we will need as many of your signatures as possible so that we can deliver those cards to him. There's going to be a big rally eventually once the bill rolls out, right? So we can have these public demonstrations. This afternoon, there's going to be a press conference over at the Education Association office in Bettendorf. And I'm going to give you 2 phone numbers, if I can locate them, that you can call in order to get directly connected to your legislators. Okay, here's one. So if you live in Robbie Smith's district, call 844-332-8460, and you will be transferred directly to him. And we want you to tell him that you're a voter in his district. Tell him where you live. Tell him your name. If you voted for him, tell him that. And also, most importantly, tell him to oppose any efforts to strip away our collective bargaining rights. If you want to be connected to your representatives, call 855-790-8815 and tell them the same. So there's actions going on. I've seen incredible solidarity happening so far, and before the bill's even been introduced. And finally, the last thing you do is attend one of the different in-district legislative forums that are taking place. So they were taking place in Dubuque last week and the week before in Davenport. This coming Saturday, there's going to be a forum at Muscatine Community College at 9 a.m. So we really need people to show up in person. Again, people have shown remarkable solidarity, and we've had record turnouts at these legislative forums in districts across the state of Iowa, and they're hearing loud and clear, we don't want this to happen, right? If they push this through, it's not going to be because they cannot say they haven't heard from their members. They cannot say constituents didn't call them. They cannot say people didn't confront them at forums. We are in person doing all this, and we need to keep that pressure up. And anything that steelworkers can do to call their legislators and show up at forums would be so greatly appreciated.
All right, we look forward to helping you out.
All right, thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Take
Tracy.
Right. Thanks, Tracy.
This has been Steel Revolution. You can follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/Steel Revolution Podcast. Questions or comments, email us steelrevolution105@gmail.com. Steel Revolution is a production of Steelworkers 105, Bettendorf, Iowa. Steel Revolution. The opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the individuals and do not reflect any official view of the United Steelworkers, USW Local 105, or its officers or sub-board members for officers.